Hey, meaningful movers. Welcome back to Moving With Me in the podcast, where actions have meaning, words have meaning, and we open up the conversations to discover what's your next move. I'm your host, Krystal. In today's episode, let's talk about having a special talent, performing at the top, and finding it hard to walk away. What happens when you over-identify with your job and the people it impacts? But y'all know how it is and what we do. We need to set that theme. So let's go ahead and do that. The word of the day is capacity. This is the maximum amount that something can contain and still perform without going empty. In this case, that something is you. How much can you bear until you start to feel yourself giving out? In fact, when you are at that point, it's late because now you are on fumes. Sometimes we grow an attachment to a project, job, relationship, and so on that we blind ourselves to a greater purpose to which those same talents can apply. That's the flip side of the word contain, which is to limit yourself. How about we explore more of all of that today? That's enough of me talking. How about we introduce our guest? And there's no one better to do that than himself. Mike, why don't you go ahead and give the people a bit of background about yourself and what you're going to share with us today?
All right. Thank you, Krystal. Thank you for having me on. My name is Mike Hammond. I'm a retired homicide detective with the Chicago Police Department. I was on the police department in total for 22 years. The last 16, I worked as a homicide detective, mainly on the west side of Chicago, but I was also in a cold case homicide unit during that time period for about 3 years. I retired about 6 years ago, and I run a podcast myself now.
Oh, wow. Went from 24/7 to another 24/7? That's what you're doing?
Yeah, it seems like it. Nobody told me it was going to be this much work, but it's rewarding. I enjoyed it. I try to make it about the victims and the victims' families. My daughter was the impetus behind me starting this. It's been very rewarding, but you're right. It is the amount of work. I'm like, man, you know what I mean? I didn't know it was this much work, but it's been great.
Yeah. End products is always good. Let's talk about your resume. I like how you threw that at me. So you said you're a Chicago police officer, 16 years in the cold case unit. My goodness. So how does working a cold case go?
Well, working cold case homicides are a little different, obviously, than working active newer murders. New murders have this time sensitivity, which I'm sure your listeners, almost everybody knows, the TV shows 48 hours and that you've got this kind of time sensitivity to obtaining the evidence in the scene, identifying witnesses, potential suspects. All of those things are very time critical. With a cold case, all of that's been done, and I looked at cases that were 50 years old. You have to kind of restart the investigation like you're looking at it through a completely new lens and just start over. Start the investigation like it was new, but everything's already been done that can be done, usually in terms of evidence collection, identifying witnesses, and those things. The one big difference, of course, is technology. What didn't exist 30 years and back was, DNA evidence. Of course, that's substantial. So that's first thing. Is there anything that's probative for DNA? Try and get that worked up. And then it's a matter of going back and trying to identify people who, may still be alive, active, that you can talk to that were involved in the case. If that detectives, potentially family, witnesses, whatever else that you can come up with.
Yeah. I really like how you talked about that lens. One thing for sure, you had some additional information became at your disposal. So the technology is one thing. I come from IT background. I always tell them, like, if you give me a database, I'm going to find the answer. It's very intricate. You can find tons of patterns. So it's interesting when I even watch these crime shows, how people create patterns without the computer. I mean, it's mind-blowing how really intelligent you guys are. But as you go forward into that, it pulls on your heartstrings, right? So you said that you make the cases a lot about the victim.
Yeah. I've always felt like the victim, especially the victim's families, don't get the recognition that they deserve. The way we're structured, kind of, our society and everything, we want to talk about the bad guy. because it makes for a good story and everybody wants to know why. And there's a certain amount of safety and security to that, is the bad guy off the street and why did he do it or why'd they do it and all that stuff. And then, of course, once you get towards prosecution, as there should be, there's a lot of impetus towards making sure they get a fair trial and those things. All of that's fair and should be that way. But what happens, I found over the years, that the victims' families, who are really suffering the most, get very little recognition. In doing this podcast, I found, going back and talking to victims' families, cases I worked now 23, 24 years ago, I didn't know how they would react, and the way they reacted was very heartening. They were excited to talk to me again, which in itself was cool, because we have one meeting in life and it's the worst moment of their life. For them to be so receptive and happy to talk to me again was really good for me. I guess it kind of said I must have been fair and done whatever I should do with them. But then, they wanted to be engaged, and they were happy that I was talking about their family member, that I was keeping their name alive. So all of that was really good for me as I started this cathartic,
Very, very. I didn't think about it that way. The first time you're meeting them is like at the worst time in their life. I didn't think of it that way. And I don't think anybody does. I know there's a level of trepidation or some kind of anxiety going into that conversation, and you're just trying to get there and say, look, I'm just trying to help, and I hope you see that. I think they appreciate the extra effort that you did, just taking the time on focusing on your approach. That's important, and that just goes to be honestly, frankly, customer service.
I learned early on that, if you got the victim's family on your side, you're always in a kind of better position to solve some of these murders. And, that sounds easy, but there's also a school of thought that you should kind of keep yourself separate, a little more clinical. I don't know that that's wrong. It just wasn't my style. I felt like the families are often going to hear things about a case that we might not hear as the police department. And if we hadn't built some kind of level of trust with the family, if we let the kind of work through the media or anything else, if they didn't have a direct line to us, then they weren't going to share that with us. Also, as quickly, I learned you can't fake things like empathy and sympathy, because they'll know, and then you're putting them off even more. So, there is a toll kind of to be paid for that when you allow yourself, that kind of access to the victims' families. I had, the mothers of victims calling me all hours of the night, sometimes just to vent or to, to grieve. Look, it's not all completely altruistic. It's not because I'm this super great guy. There was a backside to it, and the backside was I wanted to solve the murder. I want to make sure I had the right person who did it, and I did want to bring some closure to them. I think closure is a strange word that never really works out the way it sounds, but at least closing that door of finding out what happened. And so it was twofold. One, I genuinely felt for the victims. It's hard not to, but also there's that element of there's benefit to me, very frankly, in building those relationships, because it would help me solve some of those murders. I'm just careful to make it say, I don't want to sound like, wow, this guy was a super great guy. Letting these, maybe it was a little bit about that, but it was also part of doing the job.
For sure. Which leads me to this, you were just in this endless quest for answers, and that definitely helped you be great at what you did. But it also, like just what you said just now, that whole investment does take a toll on you. And it ended up being where you had to make a decision to retire. How was that process? You're doing this for 16 years, so you were on this quest of identifying, getting these answers and finding patterns and doing all this stuff. And you had to make a decision, me or them, in a way. Tell me how that worked its way with you.
Well, it's a good question. I think it just has an expiration date, being a homicide detective. I think because of the intensity and the stakes are always just so high that you're always trying to do the right thing. I think for me, it just came on me like, I think I'm done with this. I wanted to end it. I loved the job. I really did. It's kind of what I always wanted to do. I felt really lucky. I made detective with only 5-6 years on the police department, which is, that in itself is not easy. And then to do it for 16 years, something that I dreamed of doing, I feel super lucky to have been able to do it. but it wasn't one case, but there was a period where I'm like, okay, I get through this period, I'm probably done. And it just kind of came upon me like that. I didn't want to do it until I hated it, or I was bitter, or I was any of those things. Like I wanted to feel like that I was proud of it. And real quickly, just to tell you how that went, you always have, in a city like Chicago, where we have so much violence, unfortunately, you always have a bunch of cases you're working on. And when you work cold cases, I worked in a cold case unit where I was dedicated to that for 3 years. That was federally funded, and that's all we did, which was great because we weren't catching new murders, so we were allowed to really focus on those cases. And then I left there, went back to working active cases after my partner retired, just because I kind of wanted to be back more attached to the street and things. And then that federal funding ran out eventually anyway, so they kind of moved the cold case back, and then I was doing both. I mean, they moved them back to the areas. So I always had a lot of open murders on my board of open cases. And I always had a lot because I was picking up old cases from the 60s. Like someone would say, hey, I heard about this, whatever the case. And so I would pick it up. But anyway, the point is, when I decided I was going to retire, I thought, I got to call my victims' families and let them know, because that's the right thing to do. Stay in contact with them. And I was worried about that because of our manpower issues and just the way it worked. I knew a lot of those cases, I wasn't going to be able to hand off directly to anybody. It was going to be a matter of the case was going to sit until something came up or something new came in. It's not for a lack of effort by anybody that's working. I worked with great detectives. It's just a pure manpower and workload thing, So I was going to have to tell these families, and I knew they were going to ask, like, okay, great, but who's going to pick up my son or daughter's case, right? I knew I wasn't not going to have an answer for that. So I put it off like 2 months out. I said, all right, on this Thursday or whatever it was, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to tell the sergeant I'm unavailable for anything else today. I'm going to call the victims' families. And I'll tell you something, this is the truth. If I called a dozen of those families, I'm not sure it was that many, but call it 10 or 12 families, every single one said basically the same thing. I'm so happy for you. Thank you for all you've done for us. There was none of that self-serving, which would have been fair, right? It'd been totally fair for them to say, who am I going to call? Who's going to be looking into my daughter's case, and those things. Not one did. And by the end, I had to take a break and walk outside. It was very an emotional thing, but also I realized that I had not given myself enough credit for the positive end of the work I did. Again, not trying to make myself a great guy or anything, because there's a lot of great detectives that do it, but you don't think about it while you're doing it. All you're thinking about is, I need to get the next thing done.
Yeah.
I need to get the next thing done. You never, even you solve a very difficult case and you get a conviction and the family's happy, you rarely take the time to say, wow, I did a great job on that. You just don't do it because the next one's coming. But on that day with the victims' families, I think it was pretty emotional, also pretty awesome. You know what I mean? And I still, frankly, I still talk to some. And now with the podcast, I talk to some. It's a very strange dynamic. It's much more like we're kind of old friends than this kind of relationship you think it might be, of like bringing up all this horrible stuff and that. It doesn't really work that way. Mostly it's just like we're just chatting.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I talk about with leadership in general is the value of appreciation, the value of gratitude, because we're so hard on ourselves that we don't take a moment to pause and say, I did that. Mm-hmm. We have this term like celebrate small milestones, and we get so hung up on the end, the delivery, the execution, that end result, that we don't even celebrate the milestones that happened between that. As a good leader or a good customer or what have you, it's great for them to say thank you and for that acknowledgement to come through. Because I think it gives you permission and a pathway to kind of take a deep breath and say, yeah, thank you. I did do good, huh?
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, that's the difference, I think, between being a leader and kind of being a boss, right? A leader does exactly those things. Says, well, I just said all those things. I worked for some great bosses or leaders, and they would often acknowledge the work that we were doing and say, hey, great job. But I mean, even for them, it was like, great job, but okay, on to the next thing. But still, I mean, you're right. It is a critical part of leadership, I think, to acknowledge the work that the people are doing for you, and to pull your own ego out of it and say, hey, you did a really great job there, and it means a lot, right? It means a lot to hear it. I know that part of it always meant a lot to me when these people that I admired and worked hard for would say, and you get awards as a policeman. Those awards meant very little to us, you know what I mean? Because that's a political thing. What meant a lot more was the family being appreciative and the people you worked for and worked with that you admired saying, hey, great job on that. That's the real awards,
Yeah. The folks that know what it really took and what it takes to keep going. So you retired, and I think you mentioned there's just always going to be more. The murders never end. So you ended up having to kind of really find a new purpose. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you really hit that on the head. I think everybody goes into a job. I'm not speaking for you, but I'm guessing even IT, it's a problem-solving job, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody goes into, I think, a job thinking, I'm going to make a difference. Like, I'm going to be the one, right? There does come a time where you realize, especially, unfortunately, a city like Chicago, like, this is never going to stop. These murders are going to keep coming. There was a point when I was young and aggressive, really wanted to do it. I didn't even want to go on vacation. I think my ex-wife, who I'm very close with, the mother of my kids, we're very close now. I think she could tell you this better than anybody. Like, I didn't want to come home. I wanted to be working those cases all the time. And it's not that I didn't love my family. It's just like, that's what you want to be doing. And then it occurs to you that at some point, and maybe it's just maturity, I can go on vacation and come back and it's not changing significantly. You know what I mean? It's still coming there. As I got close to retirement, I had to come to terms with that. It's going to happen whether I'm here or not, and do the best I can, try and do right by the families and the victims. Sometimes there's no family, it's just the victims, and those are the ones you really want to work hard on because they've got nobody and they end up in this horrible way, and those are the ones you really want to fight for. But you do the best you can and tend to your mental health,
Yeah, for sure. Did this new business venture with your friend happen before your podcast? Which one happened first?
Yeah, right. As I retired, I had a good friend of mine who was a venture capitalist. He said, hey, when you think about retiring, I'd like for you to work for me. And he has a bunch of different investment entities. And we're good friends. We coached our son's baseball for years, whatever. And he just hired me to be kind of a go-between, a fixer between him and his different investment entities. That was a pretty good fit. It was really interesting. I didn't even take a business class in college. I got a criminal psychology degree. And so it was really interesting to see the machinations of business at a really high level. But what it taught me is that a lot of people have no idea what a crisis really is, right? And you probably, IT, I'm sure you see this, like, sure you get calls like, oh, the end of the world. It's the end of the world. Yeah, no, it's not. It's not the end of the world. You're not bleeding out. I mean, it's going to be fine. It's fascinating for me. It was the same kind of work as solving murders, just in a different way, putting the pieces together and saying, all right, this is a problem here. Let's fix that, and so on. It was great. I really enjoyed it. It just kind of run its course because you do something like that and you basically work yourself out of a job after a while. Things start to kind of run smoothly, which was great. We're still close friends, and occasionally something will come up and I'll help. And then, my daughter loves true crime, and she was on me about that. I listen to these true crime podcasts. They're great, but they're missing your perspective. And so I toyed with it, and it's counterintuitive for us to put ourselves out there like this. And then finally, I decided, if I could make it about the victims families might be interesting. And then when the victims' families got engaged and seemed excited about it, that made it a lot easier, transition. So I've done that for about 8 months, and it's gone really well. I'm shocked at how quickly it picked up, but it's been fun.
Yeah. Well, I don't know why you're shocked. I mean, you're a great, personable guy. You have a lot to offer, a lot to give. It's interesting, right? So we can completely engorge ourselves in one career, and we've developed some strong talent over time and skill sets that we will almost convince ourselves that if you take me out of this environment where it's so obvious that these skills fit, that if you take me out of that, I have nowhere else to go. So I think it's a great message for folks who are retiring from whatever industry or practice that you're in, that when you go and say, okay, let me try something else different, how well those skills translate. Yeah. And they really bridge quite a bit. I mean, you're bringing a different thought process into an area that didn't have that. You got to give yourself some grace for that, because it's not even just one thing. You did it a third time with the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I agree. I'm glad you make that point. All life experience has value, even if it's a tough, negative life experience, right? It has value. I think I was just surprised. I don't know if you felt this when you started this. You never know. You start talking in a microphone. Is anybody going to really be interested in this or not? You know what I mean? I'm pleasantly surprised and happy that it's kind of picked up. But yeah, I mean, I like what you said because, often I go talk to groups. I have friends who are school teachers and a lot of 8th grade and like senior level students in some pretty rough neighborhoods in Chicago. And I try and impart that message in the end all the time. Like, look, every life experience has value. Don't anybody ever tell you that you are at a disadvantage or that, you're behind anybody else, because you have a life value that a lot of people never see. And it may seem negative, it may seem scary, but in the end, you understand how to overcome adversity intuitively better than 70% of the people in the world, right? Just by the environment that you've been forced to grow up in, that has value. It will always have value. So look at it as a value add and not something negative. I believe that's true. I really do. I worked in tough neighborhoods my whole career, and I met people that were brilliant, a lot of talent. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I like that point you made. It really rings true for me,
Awesome. I'm glad you said that. I always tell people there are going to be some obstacles and some challenges, but when you hit that workforce, you're probably ahead of the starting line than anybody else, because let something disappointing happen to them and see how they react versus because you've already been exposed to that. It's just putting a different lens on that and showing them the value in that.
That really hit home for me. And not to interrupt, I'm sorry, but
yeah, you could.
After I retired and I started working for my buddy, and my buddy is a city guy who grew up, and self-made guy. So he knew adversity and how to overcome it. But in working with these wealthy, successful business people, like I said, calling, 1 a.m, it's the end of the world. It's the end of the world. Like, no, it's not. But it did occur to me, like, they've never really had to face the kind of adversity. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. And what you're saying, I think you intuitively know, I've seen worse than this.
Yep.
If this is as bad as it gets, we can handle this.
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of value to that.
Thank you so much. I have truly enjoyed this conversation. The calm in your voice. I think it's great that different perspectives and dialects and the volumes and tones that people deliver the message, it hits home because it resonates with different folks, because we receive information differently on different days.
Yeah.
Really appreciate just your take on this.
Well, thank you very much.
So I know you had some great comments going on in there, but do you have any golden nuggets that you want to leave the people with, and just add some ketchup to recap?
I always end my shows by saying, take care of yourself and take care of each other. And I think that if you're old enough, I think that was ingrained in us, like you watch out for yourself and your neighbor and you help build. And I think that's important. And we need to get back to that. I'm so lucky my grandmother meant so much to me. She was an awesome human being and still the funniest person I probably ever met. She'd always have things to say to me. Like, when I got in the police department, she said, "Michael, I don't want you coming out of this job with any more holes in you than you started." I thought, well, fair. That's fair. But she would tell me these great things like regret and jealousy are wasted emotions and things, But one of my favorite things she would say is, you change the world by sweeping the sidewalk in front of your house, which is an old saying, but I think that's true. Everybody's stressed. Try not to let it override you. You still care about the people you care about. You still need to take care of things you need to take care of. And that goes with everything in daily life. Try and pass that message on as much as possible. The more we do it, I think the better it'll be. That whole message of all life experience has value. So look at it as that and try and impart that on other people, because people going through tough times and hard times and kids struggling. And it's like, I know it seems horrible right now, but it has value. It will, I promise you. That's all I got, I think.
Oh, that's plenty. That's the episode today. There is commitment and there is compassion. Then there is capacity. You can have all the good intentions and an irrefutable sentiment, but at what cost? There is admiration and courage in being the support when everyone else seems to have given up. Even if you feel there is no answer at the end, it just may not be in the way you expected. Mayhap, perhaps, you were that answer. Never ever think that your effort is worth something only if the results come in. It's so much more because you gave a damn. Sometimes you will never know, and in some odd way, that is exactly how it is supposed to be. That's why I appreciate Mike for sharing his gift and putting it to use for good. And when he saw an end to one career, he found a spark for another. The talent is still there. The application just changed. Can any of you relate to Mike's passion, integrity, and attachment to the work that you do? Have you found it hard to walk away, only to still have that itch? Have you found a way to satisfy your purpose and maintain awareness of your limitations? I love it all, and so will someone else. Before I let you go, Mike, why don't you go ahead and remind the people who you are, where they can find your resources, or reach out to you.
Okay, well, first, let me say, Krystal, it's been an honor and pleasure to be on your show. Thank you so much. You're doing great stuff here, and I really appreciate that. I'm honored to be here. Again, my name is Mike Hammond. My podcast is Detective Story with Mike Hammond. It's just that simple. And you can get me directly, easy, at my email is mike@detectivestory.net. And that's also my website, detectivestory.net. And so you can get me through there and see what's going on. I appreciate all of it.
Awesome. All you true crime fans, head on over there. I'll make sure to include all of Mike's resources and connections in the episode description, as well as on my website's resources page, movingwithmeaning.com. Make sure you guys subscribe to the show, Moving With Meaning, the podcast, and tap that alert bell so you know when these episodes drop. I am on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube Music. Please share, like, repost, and follow. Tag someone. We're creating a community. Quick housekeeping before you go. Follow me on Instagram at movingwithmeaning82 and on Pinterest at Arthur KB Clark. Also, connect with me on LinkedIn. I do dabble in TikTok at Krystal B. Clark. My Etsy store has some handy dandy digital downloads. Lastly, run over to my YouTube channel and have a look or two. Links are in the episode. Alrighty, I'm Krystal on Moving With Me in the podcast, reminding you to take it one step at a time. All moves have meaning. Check y'all later.